Zara Velthari had studied humans for 3 long years before she ever saw one in person. She sat in her small office aboard the Coalition research station, looking at reports and videos about these strange creatures from a planet called Earth. The humans had only been in space for 200 years, which was nothing compared to her own people who had been traveling between stars for over 5,000 years. Everything she read about them made her shake her head in disbelief. Humans fought wars over everything. They fought over land, over water, over ideas, even over which invisible being they thought lived in the sky. They destroyed their own planet with pollution and waste, then acted surprised when the weather started changing. They built weapons that could kill millions of people, then spent decades arguing about whether they should use them. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to think violence was the answer to every problem they faced. When the Galactic Coalition finally decided to make contact with Earth, Zara volunteered to be part of the cultural exchange program. Her friends thought she was crazy. Why would anyone want to work with such a dangerous species? But Zara had her reasons. She believed that someone needed to keep an eye on these humans, to make sure they did not cause trouble for the rest of the galaxy. She thought she could handle them. The human they assigned to her research team was named Jake Morrison. Zara first saw him in the docking bay of the Unity, their research ship. He was tall, much taller than most of her people, with broad shoulders and dark hair. His hands were covered in small scars, the kind that came from fighting or working with dangerous tools. When he smiled at her, Zara noticed that the smile did not reach his eyes. There was something hidden behind those eyes, something that made her feel uneasy. Jake had been a soldier before becoming what humans called an archaeologist, someone who studied old civilizations. Zara found this career change suspicious. Why? Would a warrior suddenly become interested in ancient history? She decided to watch him carefully. Their mission was simple enough. They were going to a planet called Kepler 442b to study the ruins left behind by an ancient race called the Vorthak. These ruins were made of stone and metal that seemed to ignore the normal rules of physics. The Coalition wanted to understand how the Vorthak technology worked before other groups could steal it for themselves. Zara expected the humans to approach the problem like they approached everything else, with brute force and no patience. She was completely wrong. On their first day exploring the ruins, Jake showed knowledge that amazed even Zara's enhanced brain. He could look at a wall and tell them which parts were weak and might fall down. He found hidden doors that their scanners had missed. Most strange of all, he seemed to know which artifacts were dangerous to touch. When other team members asked him how he knew these things, Jake would just shrug and say it was soldier's instinct. But Zara's bioscanners told a different story. Every time Jake got close to certain Vorthak artifacts, his brain activity would spike in ways she had never seen before. His pupils would get bigger, his breathing would change, and sometimes he would tilt his head like he was listening to something that no one else could hear. Zara began to suspect that Jake Morrison was not telling them the whole truth about himself. The real mystery started when they found a sealed chamber deep inside the main temple. The walls were covered with Vorthak writing, symbols that looked like they were carved with precision that no normal tool could achieve. The team's translation computers could not read the text, which was unusual. Coalition technology could decode almost any written language, even ones from species that had been dead for thousands of years. Jake stared at those walls for almost an hour. Zara watched his face change as he studied the symbols. At first, he looked curious, then confused, then worried, and finally frightened. She had never seen a human look frightened before. In all her research, humans seemed to think they were afraid of nothing. The chamber was completely silent except for the soft hum of their equipment. Other team members were taking pictures and scanning the walls, but Jake just stood there staring. Zara moved closer to him, trying to read his expression. Up close, she could see sweat on his forehead even though the chamber was cool. Then Jake turned to face the team with an expression that made Zara's blood run cold. "We need to leave," he said quietly. "Now." Before anyone could ask why, the chamber began to make a low humming sound. The Vorthak symbols on the walls started to glow with a soft blue light that grew brighter by the second. The humming got louder, and the floor began to vibrate under their feet. Jake grabbed Zara's arm, but his grip was gentle despite his obvious panic. She could feel the strength in his hand, the kind of strength that came from years of training and fighting. But there was also something else, a careful control that suggested he was being very careful not to hurt her. "Trust me," he whispered to her as the other team members began to panic. "Please." Zara looked into his eyes and saw something she had not expected to see in a human. She saw genuine concern for her safety, not just for himself or his mission, but for her specifically. In that moment, she made a decision that would change everything. She nodded and let him lead her toward the chamber exit. They ran through the temple corridors as the humming sound grew to a roar behind them. Jake seemed to know exactly which way to go, even though they had entered the chamber from a different direction. He led them through passages that Zara was sure they had not explored before, but somehow he knew they would lead to safety. When they finally made it outside the temple, Jake pushed everyone behind a large stone wall and covered Zara with his own body just as the temple exploded. The entire structure collapsed inward, creating a crater that was half a kilometer wide. The sound was deafening, and the ground shook so hard that Zara thought they might all fall into the crater. When the dust settled and the noise stopped, Zara looked at Jake Morrison with new eyes. He had saved all their lives, but he refused to explain how he had known the danger was coming. As she watched him help the other team members check for injuries, she realized that everything she thought she knew about humans might be wrong. But she also realized that Jake Morrison was hiding, something much bigger than she had imagined. The temple explosion saved their lives, but it also created more questions than answers. In the days that followed, Zara could not stop thinking about how Jake had known to evacuate the chamber. She had run the sensor data through every analysis program the coalition had, but nothing explained what had caused the temple to collapse. The structure had been stable for thousands of years, so why had it suddenly become dangerous the moment they found the sealed chamber? Jake refused to talk about it. When team members asked him how he had known to leave, he would just say that something felt wrong. When they pressed him for details, he would change the subject or find an excuse to leave the room. Zara noticed that the other humans on the team did not seem surprised by his behavior. They treated his mysterious knowledge like it was normal, which made her even more suspicious. She decided to investigate on her own. Using her diplomatic access codes, Zara began searching through restricted human military databases. What she found made her secondary hearts stop beating. Jake Morrison was not just a former soldier. He had been part of something called Project Mindbridge, a classified program that had ended 7 years ago. According to the official records, all participants in the project were listed as either dead or missing. But Jake was very much alive, working as a civilian archaeologist with credentials that should not exist for someone with his background. The more Zara dug into his past, the more confused she became. There were gaps in his service record, medical files that had been completely erased, and training reports that used words she did not understand. The breakthrough came when she found a partially corrupted file from a military research facility. The document mentioned neural enhancement procedures, something about synthetic brain tissue, and experiments designed to help soldiers interface with alien technology. Most of the file was unreadable, but one phrase kept appearing in the fragments. She could decode living weapon systems. Zara felt sick. Neural enhancement was forbidden by coalition law. 3 different species in galactic history had tried to improve their brains with artificial components, and all 3 had destroyed themselves when the enhanced individuals could not fit back into normal society. The enhanced ones either went insane or became so different from their original species that they could no longer communicate with them. She confronted Jake at their next excavation site. They were working in a smaller temple about 1 kilometer from the crater where the first one had been. Jake was alone in the equipment tent, studying a Vorthak data crystal that their scanner said was completely inactive. But as Zara watched him, she saw his fingers moving in the air above the crystal like he was touching something invisible. "You are not what you pretend to be," Zara said, making sure her translator would render her words clearly in human English. Jake did not look up from the crystal. "None of us are," he replied quietly. "The other humans know, do they not? That is why they follow you. That is why they brought you on this mission even though you have no real training in archaeology." Jake finally set down the crystal and looked at her. Up close, Zara could see how tired he looked. There were dark circles under his eyes and lines on his face that seemed too deep for someone his age. He looked like a person carrying a weight that was too heavy for one individual to bear. "You want to know what I am?" he asked. "I am a walking weapon system designed to interface with alien technology. The human military filled my brain with synthetic neurons and quantum processors, then sent me to fight wars on planets where our enemies had better technology than we did." Zara felt her blood turn cold. Everything she had feared about humans was true. They really would turn their own people into monsters if it gave them an advantage in battle. The project was shut down because people like me started having mental breakdowns, Jake continued. Some went completely insane and had to be killed by their own teammates. Others just disappeared into space and were never seen again. The lucky ones died quickly before the modifications could drive them crazy. "And you?" Zara asked, though she was not sure she wanted to hear the answer. Jake picked up the Vorthak crystal again. This time, Zara could see it responding to his touch. Ancient symbols began to flicker inside the crystal, glowing with the same blue light they had seen in the temple chamber. "I learned to hide what I am," Jake said. "But hiding means I cannot help people the way I should, cannot use what they made me into for anything good. Until now," Zara realized. Until now. Jake smiled, and for the first time since she had met him, the smile reached his eyes. "These ruins, this technology, I can understand it in ways that might actually matter, but only if someone trusts me enough to let me try." Zara stared at the glowing crystal in his hands. She could see patterns in the light, symbols that seemed to shift and change as she watched them. Part of her wanted to run away to report what she had learned to the coalition authorities and let them decide what to do with Jake Morrison. But another part of her, a part she had not known existed, was curious about what he might be able to accomplish if someone gave him the chance. "What do you need?" she asked. Jake looked surprised. "You are not afraid of me?" "I am terrified of you," Zara admitted. "But I am also fascinated." Show me what you can do." Jake held the crystal between them, and the light grew brighter. Suddenly, Zara could see images forming in the glow. Pictures of the planet as it had been thousands of years ago, when the Vorthak were still alive. She saw their cities, their ships, their people. But she also saw something else, something that made her gasp in shock. She saw humans, not modern humans, but an earlier version of the species, primitive and savage, fighting wars with crude weapons. The Vorthak had been watching Earth, studying humanity from a distance, and what they saw had terrified them. "They were afraid of us," Jake said, softly. "The Vorthak could see into possible futures, and in those futures they saw humanity spreading across the galaxy like a virus, consuming everything we touched, turning their sacred sites into mining operations, their temples into shopping centers." "That is why they hid," Zara whispered. "That is why they hid." But they also left behind clues, technologies that could only be activated by someone with the right kind of enhanced neural structure, someone exactly like me. The implications hit Zara like a physical blow. If Jake was right, then the Vorthak had not just been another ancient civilization. They had been refugees, hiding from a future they feared. And somehow, they had designed their technology to respond only to humans who had been modified in very specific ways. Project Mindbridge was not humanity's first attempt at neural enhancement, Jake continued. It was their latest attempt to create individuals who could safely interface with Vorthak technology. The other projects failed because we did not understand what we were trying to build. But you understand now. I am beginning to. Jake set the crystal down and the light faded. But I cannot do it alone. The knowledge in my head, the connections I can make, they are too much for one person to handle safely. If someone I trusted was willing to help share the load. He extended his hand to her, and Zara could see faint traces of energy dancing between his fingers. Not the harsh, artificial glow of human technology, but something warmer, more organic. Zara stared at his outstretched hand, understanding exactly what he was offering. A partnership, a chance to guide humanity's expansion in directions that might actually benefit the galaxy instead of destroying it. The smart thing would be to refuse, to file her report, and let the coalition deal with Jake through proper diplomatic channels. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something she had never expected to find in a human. She saw hope. Zara never got the chance to take Jake's hand. Before she could decide whether to trust him, their camp was attacked by ships she did not recognize. The vessels descended from the sky like metal birds of prey, their weapons already charging with deadly energy. She heard someone shouting that they were hegemony raiders, a group of rogue coalition species who believed alien technology should be taken by force instead of studied through peaceful research. The attack came without warning. One moment, Zara and Jake were talking quietly in the equipment tent, and the next moment the air was filled with the screaming sound of energy weapons. The first blast turned their main shelter into melted metal and burning fabric. Through the smoke and chaos, Zara could see figures in battle armor moving between the ruins, searching for survivors to capture or kill. Jake grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the back of the tent, just as another energy bolt tore through the space where she had been standing. The heat from the blast singed the fur on her arms and filled her nose with the smell of burned electronics. Around them, Other team members were shouting and running in all directions, trying to find cover among the ancient stone structures. "We have to reach the main temple," Jake said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. "If we can get there, I might be able to activate the defense systems." "Defense systems?" Zara asked. "The place has been dead for 10,000 years. Jake's expression was grim, not dead. Sleeping. They ran through the ruins together, staying low to avoid the energy bolts that sizzled through the air above their heads. Zara was amazed at how Jake moved through the ancient structures. He seemed to know exactly which paths were safe and which corridors might collapse under weapons fire. Passages that she was sure had been blocked opened for him, as if the stones themselves were moving aside to let him pass. Behind them, she could hear Lisa Park and Chen Rodriguez, two of the human team members, following close behind. Lisa was a young linguist who had joined the expedition to study Vorthak language, while Chen was a demolitions expert who looked too young to be handling explosives. Both of them were breathing hard from running, but they kept up without complaint. "How do you know where you are going?" Chen asked as they ducked through a narrow archway that Zara did not remember seeing before. Jake did not answer. His eyes had taken on a strange, distant look, as if he was seeing something that existed in a different time or place. Emergency lighting began to flicker on in the corridors around them, illumination that had not worked for thousands of years suddenly coming to life at their approach. When they reached the central temple chamber, Jake walked directly to what Zara had thought was just a decorative wall panel. The moment his hands touched the stone surface, the entire room transformed. Holographic displays materialized in the air around them, showing tactical information and system diagnostics in languages that were older than most known civilizations. "My God," Lisa whispered. "How is this possible?" Jake's eyes were closed, his face tight with concentration. The Vorthak were not just another ancient civilization. They were refugees, survivors of something that destroyed their original home. They built these outposts as sanctuaries, places where they could hide until it was safe to emerge. What were they hiding from? Zara asked, though part of her already feared the answer. The temple's defensive systems came online with a deep humming, sound that seemed to vibrate in their bones. Outside, Zara could hear the hegemony raiders shouting in confusion as their ships suddenly stopped working. Their weapons went silent, as if the very concept of violence had been temporarily suspended in the area around the temple. "They were hiding from us," Jake said quietly. "From humanity. From what we were going to become." Zara felt her blood turn to ice. "That is impossible. Humans did not achieve spaceflight until recently. Until recently, yes. But time is not linear when you are dealing with quantum archaeology sites. The Vorthak had access to technologies that could look into probable futures, and what they saw of humanity's expansion into the galaxy terrified them." Jake opened his eyes, and for a moment, Zara saw something vast and alien looking back at her through his human features. The patterns of light beneath his skin had become brighter, more complex, as if his connection to the temple systems was changing him on a fundamental level. "They saw us conquering everything we touched," he continued, "not through malice, but through sheer stubborn refusal to accept that anything was impossible. They saw us turning their sacred sites into mining operations, their philosophical temples into shopping centers. So they hid their most important discoveries where only someone with the right kind of enhanced neural architecture could find them." "Someone like you," Zara breathed. "Someone exactly like me." Project Mindbridge was not humanity's first experiment. With neural augmentation, it was our latest attempt to create individuals who could interface with Vorthak technology safely. The other projects failed because we did not understand what we were trying to build. The implications hit Zara like a physical blow. If Jake was right, then humanity's entire expansion into the galaxy had been guided by encounters with Vorthak ruins. Every major technological breakthrough, every leap forward in space travel or weapons development could be traced back to archaeological discoveries on worlds where the ancient refugees had hidden their knowledge. But that would mean Lisa started to say, then stopped as she realized what she was thinking. That would mean humanity has been following a path the Vorthak laid out for us, Jake confirmed. They did not just hide from our future expansion. They tried to guide it, to make sure that when we finally reached their level of technology, we would be wise enough to use it properly. Outside the temple, the hegemony raiders were finding their ships completely disabled. Not destroyed, just locked in place by forces they could not see or understand. Their boarding parties had been gently but firmly pushed out of the ruins by invisible barriers that would not let them pass. Chen looked out through one of the temple windows. They are not fighting back anymore. They are just standing there looking, confused. The Vorthak defense systems do not kill, Jake explained. They teach. Right now, those raiders are experiencing shared memories. Glimpses of the ancient refugees' final days, their desperate flight from a dying homeworld, their agonizing decision to hide rather than fight. And what happens when the memories end? Zara asked. Then they go home with a better understanding of what they almost destroyed today. The Vorthak believed that most conflicts come from ignorance, not malice. Show someone the true consequences of their actions, and most people will choose a better path. Jake suddenly swayed on his feet, his face going pale. The holographic displays flickered and began to fade as his connection to the temple. Systems weakened. Zara caught him before he could fall, feeling the heat radiating from his skin where the neural pathways were overloaded. "I pushed too hard," he whispered. The interface was not designed for human minds, even enhanced ones. Zara helped him sit down, against the wall, watching as the temple systems slowly powered down around them. Through the windows, she could see the hegemony ships beginning to move again, but instead of resuming their attack, they were turning away from the planet. "They are leaving," Chen reported. Jake managed a weak smile. The Vorthak were very good teachers. As they waited for the coalition rescue ships to arrive, Zara found herself looking at Jake Morrison with completely new eyes. He was not just a human with dangerous military enhancements. He was a bridge between what humanity was and what it could become. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for that transformation, and whether she was brave enough to help guide it. The hegemony raiders left without firing another shot. Their ships departed as quietly as they had arrived, but Zara could see in their final transmissions that something fundamental had changed in their crews. The shared memories from the Vorthak defense systems had shown them exactly what they were trying to destroy and why it mattered. Most of them would never participate in another raid. Jake collapsed completely after the temple system shut down. His enhanced neural pathways had been pushed far beyond their safe limits, and his brain was literally overheating from the connection with technology that was never meant for human minds. Zara found herself faced with a choice that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. She could let him die and file a report that would satisfy the coalition authorities. Jake Morrison would become just another casualty of human military. Experimentation and the secrets he carried would die with him. The galaxy would remain safe from whatever dangers humanity might pose in the future. or she could save him. Zara used her diplomatic medical authorization to access restricted coalition healing technologies. The neural stabilizer was designed for her own species, but she modified the settings to work with Jake's human brain chemistry. More importantly, she used her own neural energy to create a temporary connection with his failing systems, literally sharing her consciousness with his to keep him alive. For 3 days, Zara maintained a psychic link with Jake Morrison. The Fee experience was unlike anything she had ever imagined. She found herself experiencing fragments of his memories, his training, the systematic destruction of his original personality in the name of creating a more effective weapon. She saw the other Mind Bridge subjects, dozens of young soldiers who had volunteered to become living interfaces with alien technology, believing they were serving their species' greatest need. Most of them had died screaming as their brains tried to process information that no human mind was designed to handle. The few who survived the initial modifications were driven insane by the constant flow of alien thoughts and concepts. Jake had stayed sane by learning to compartmentalize, to hide the vast knowledge that threatened to overwhelm his human consciousness. But hiding meant isolation, meant watching his own people make the same mistakes over and over again because he could not risk revealing what he truly was. Through their shared connection, Zara also experienced something else. She saw the Vorthak archives as Jake perceived them, not as static databases but as living conversations with beings who had died thousands of years ago. The ancient refugees had encoded their consciousness into their technology, creating a form of immortality that allowed them to continue teaching long after their physical bodies had turned to dust. When Jake finally regained consciousness, he found Zara sitting beside his medical pod. Her normally perfect uniform was wrinkled and stained with exhaustion. Her skin had taken on a faint silver pattern that had not been there before, neural traces that showed her exposure to the same, alien knowledge that had nearly killed him. "You saw," he said. It was not a question. "I saw." Zara's voice was hoarse from the neural feedback. The Vorthak were not wrong about humanity, were they? "You really are going to consume everything you touch." Jake struggled to sit up, wincing as his augmented neurons fired painful warning signals. Maybe? Probably. But consumption is not always destruction, Zara. Sometimes it is transformation. How can you be so calm about this? Your own species turned you into a living weapon and then tried to bury the evidence. The Vorthak fled their homeworld because they were terrified of what humanity might become. Does none of that bother you? Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "Do you know what I found in the deepest parts of the Vorthak data archives?" "What?" "Hope." He looked up at her, and Zara was startled to see genuine warmth in his expression. "They were not just afraid of us, Zara. They were afraid of what we might accomplish." The Vorthak were an old species, set in their ways, bound by tradition and cautious to a fault. They saw humanity's reckless expansion and our complete disregard for established limitations, and they realized something that terrified them, which was that we might actually succeed. That we might be the first species in galactic history to break through the barriers that have kept every other civilization trapped in cycles of rise and decline. The Vorthak could see probable futures, remember. And in some of those futures, humanity does not just survive. We help everyone else transcend their limitations too. Zara felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of prejudices she had not even realized she was carrying. The enhancement process that nearly killed you. It is not just about interfacing with alien technology, is it? No. It is about becoming a bridge between what we are and what we could be. The Mind Bridge project failed because they tried to force the transformation instead of letting it happen naturally. But with the right guide, the right understanding of what the Vorthak actually left behind, Jake extended his hand to her again, and Zara could see faint traces of energy dancing between his fingers. Not the harsh, artificial glow of human technology, but something warmer, more organic. The same silver patterns that now marked her own skin. I cannot do this alone, Zara. The knowledge in my head, the connections I can make, they are too much for one person to handle safely. But if someone I trusted was willing to help share the load... Zara stared at his outstretched hand, understanding exactly what he was offering. Not just a partnership, but a true merger of consciousness. A chance to guide humanity's expansion in directions that might actually benefit the galaxy instead of consuming it. The neural connection they had shared while he was dying had shown her glimpses of what such cooperation might accomplish. The smart thing to do would be to refuse, to file her report, recommend that Jake be contained, and let the coalition deal with the implications of his existence through proper diplomatic channels. Her own people would understand that choice. They valued caution and careful planning above all else. But Zara was no longer the same person who had volunteered for this mission. Her exposure to Jake's memories and the Vorthak archives had changed her in ways she was still discovering. She could feel the ancient knowledge stirring in her mind, offering insights that no member of her species had ever possessed. More importantly, she had seen what humanity could become if given proper guidance. Not the destructive force that the Vorthak had feared, but something new and unprecedented in galactic history. A species that refused to accept limitations, combined with the wisdom of civilizations that had learned from 10,000 years of mistakes. "What happens if I say yes?" she asked. "Then we find out together whether the galaxy is ready for what comes next." Zara reached out and took his hand. The moment their skin made contact, she felt the neural connection reestablish itself, but this time it was stable and controlled. She could sense Jake's thoughts and memories, but they no longer threatened to overwhelm her own consciousness. Instead, they merged with her existing knowledge to create something entirely new. Through their shared awareness, she could feel the Vorthak archives opening like flowers in sunlight. Ancient databases that had been sealed for millennia recognized their combined neural signature and began releasing information that neither species could have accessed alone. Technologies that could reshape matter at the quantum level, transportation methods that folded space itself, energy sources that could power entire civilizations without environmental damage. But most importantly, she could sense the Vorthak themselves, their consciousness still active within the archives, waiting patiently for someone to prove them wrong about the future they had feared. "We have work to do?" Jake said softly. "Yes," Zara replied, feeling more alive than she ever had before. "We do." 6 months later, Zara stood on the observation deck of the research station Haven, watching human and coalition engineering teams work together to activate the first Vorthak gateway in 10,000 years. The massive ring of exotic matter hummed. With potential energy, its surface rippling like liquid mercury as quantum field generators brought it slowly online. What had started as a simple archaeological mission had become something that would change the entire galaxy. Jake stood beside her, his appearance subtly transformed by the modifications they had discovered together in the deepest Vorthak archives. His neural augmentations were no longer hidden beneath his skin. They manifested as patterns of silver light that moved like living circuits, extending beyond the boundaries of his original human form. He looked alien now, but somehow more human than he had ever been before. "Are you sure about this?" Zara asked. "Once we open that gateway, there is no going back. The Coalition will know exactly what humanity is capable of. They will know what we are all capable of," Jake corrected gently. "The Vorthak technology does not just amplify human traits. It responds to conscious intention from any sufficiently evolved species. You proved that when you helped stabilize my neural matrix." Zara touched the silver traces that now marked her own temples, the result of their shared connection with the ancient refugee technology. The modifications had not changed her fundamental nature, but they had expanded her perception in ways that were difficult to describe. She could feel the quantum fluctuations that held the gateway together, sense the vast network of similar devices scattered across the galaxy, waiting for someone with the right combination of curiosity and courage to bring them back to life. "The other Coalition species will not all be happy about this," she warned. "Some of them will see it as humanity trying to dominate the galaxy through superior technology." Jake smiled, and the expression was pure human warmth, despite the alien light dancing beneath his skin. "Then we will have to prove them wrong by example. The Vorthak were terrified of human expansion because they assumed we would use their technology the same way we have used everything else, as a tool for conquest. But what if we use it as a tool for invitation instead?" The gateway's activation sequence reached its final phase, reality bending around the ring's circumference as it opened a stable passage to the Vorthak homeworld. The planet had been abandoned for millennia, but was still perfectly preserved, waiting for its children to return home. Through their shared neural link, Zara could sense the vast cities that lay beyond the portal, empty but not dead, maintained by automated systems that had been waiting patiently for someone to come back. But Jake was not looking at the swirling portal or the readings streaming across the control room displays. He was watching the faces of the Coalition team members, seeing the wonder and possibility in their eyes as they realized what they were witnessing. Representatives from dozens of species stood together in the observation lounge, their previous suspicions and prejudices forgotten in the face of something truly extraordinary. "The Vorthak ran away because they thought humanity would consume everything we touched," he said quietly. "They were not wrong about our nature. We do transform everything we encounter. But transformation does not have to mean destruction. Sometimes it means evolution." As if to prove his point, the first Coalition explorers stepped through the gateway. Not just humans, but Velthari like Zara, crystalline Nexari whose thoughts moved at light speed, gas giant-dwelling Avarathi whose bodies existed in 4 dimensions simultaneously. All of them were now connected through the ancient refugee network, sharing knowledge and perspectives that no single species could have achieved alone. The neural link that Zara shared with Jake had become a model for voluntary consciousness, sharing between species. Instead of the forced mental modifications that had nearly destroyed the original Mind Bridge subjects, they had developed a system where individuals could choose to temporarily merge their thoughts with others. The process was completely reversible and left no permanent changes unless the participants specifically requested them. "You know what the best part is?" Jake asked as they watched their colleagues disappear into the swirling portal. "What? The Vorthak are still alive. Their homeworld is not abandoned. They have been waiting there all this time, hoping that eventually someone would prove them wrong about the future they feared." Zara felt her heart skip a beat. "You mean they are actually there, on the other side of the gateway? I mean, we are